It's in the name.
Welcome into the Helping Healing Humor podcast with Ben and Travis. On this week's episode, we have our good friend Lonnie Jones, and he is going to be speaking with us this week about fears. We want you to go and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast if you can do that for us, and we'll get right to the interview after these messages.
This episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast is brought to you by the 3rd annual Bella's Snowball 5K and 1 Mile Fun Run on Saturday, November 12th at 8 a.m. during the host of Christmas Past weekend in Fayetteville, Tennessee. November is National Adoption Awareness Month, and proceeds from this race will help Luke and Heidi Eakes with their adoption travel expenses and support the mission of Always Endure. This event is fun for the whole family. Meeting Queen Elsa, face painting, bubble zone, and candy are just a few things to look forward to. We want to see everyone dressed up. Ruffled shirt, tutu, tights, something with a little Christmas flair. What will you wear to the ball? To register, go to alwaysendure.com and click the Events tab. Thank you for helping to remove a financial barrier so a child can gain their forever home. I'm Travis Creasy. That's All-Pro counselor Ben Hayes.
Howdy.
That's Will the Thrill.
Hey, guys.
And as promised, we have another All-Pro counselor with us on this episode, Lonnie Jones, who is no stranger to the Helping Healing Humor podcast. A little different this time around, as we'll be talking about fears instead of doing an Ask Lonnie Jones Anything podcast. But Lonnie, how you doing, man?
Man, I'm living the dream and spending time with 3 of my favorite people. That's pretty cool.
Well, you give us the names of those 3 and we'll be sure to let them know.
All right, I certainly will.
Man, we are so glad to have you on this episode with us. It's always awesome to have you on board with us, as usually we're asking you a bunch of random questions. We're going to be a little bit more pointed in our questions today, and I've got the Ministering to Youth. The Ministering Youth Conference is coming up next weekend, actually, and so I've got the Ministering to Youth question of the day, and that is, what do you notice in your practice or just in your dealing with people in general as being the most common fears that people have? And then kind of a follow-up to that is, what are some of the techniques that you've found most useful in handling those fears?
I think free-floating anxiety is the most common fear. It's just people just don't feel at ease. They don't feel settled. They don't feel safe. Maybe it's a fear of rejection, or maybe it's a fear of not fitting in. But primarily, when you talk about the ministering to youth, that subset of people, the young people, their biggest fear is just this general, I'm afraid all the time, and I don't really know why. I like to use cognitive behavioral therapy. I like to use aversion response therapy. I like to use exposure therapy. The only way to overcome a fear is to face it. And I mean, there's no magic formula for that. If you're afraid of snakes, you got to look at pictures of snakes, read books about snakes, and occasionally at some point you may have to pick up a snake. I try to avoid the word handling snakes. Since we're all ministers, I try to avoid that. And that's what guys tease me about it all the time. So,
well, I know, you've, even for me personally, several years back, I started deer hunting, and I wasn't real comfortable with heights, especially like what you would do with, deer hunting. And I know that you kind of helped me a little bit with that. So explain a little bit about what some of those, I know some people listening may go, what are all those different therapies that you mentioned? You want to just kind of break those down a little bit for us?
Yeah. So typically when a person is afraid of something, they're getting a message either from their head, either from their heart, or either from their gut. You have a head brain, a heart brain, and a gut brain, and all 3 of those mechanisms help us survive. So if you read Gavin de Becker's book, The Gift of Fear, he didn't say fear is a bad thing. Fear is something that the Creator gave us to warn us about stuff. And we get so politically correct and we get so sophisticated that we don't listen to it. But when you get a quote unquote gut feeling about something, or your spider sense tingles around a certain situation, you should probably listen to that. Now, when we talk about a clinical problem, it's you've got a fear and it's an irrational fear. Could you climb a tree in a modern tree climber and have a catastrophic system failure and the metal break and the steel cable fall apart or the tree fall with you? Yeah, that's possible, but is it probable? So when you get the emotional brain and the intellectual brain to talk to each other, the cognitive behavioral therapy, my thoughts affect my emotions and my emotions affect my behavior. And that pyramid works in every direction. And so when you start talking about fear, is it rational to be afraid of falling? Well, yeah. Well, in the ropes course industry, we say, falling's never killed anybody. It's hitting the ground that kills them all. But, the idea that it's rational to be afraid of falling. Okay. Now, what does falling look like? Well, the climbing stand comes apart, or I'm climbing without a tether, or the tree falls. Well, then you start looking at it's okay to be afraid of falling, but the scenario you've created is almost like that OCD thing where you catastrophize everything. It's not just that I could fall, I could slip. It's, the thing's going to fall apart and drop me like a stone. And so when you start getting the intellectual brain and the emotional brain, it's not either or, but both, and you get them to overlap. That's when you're going to be making good thought processes. And then the exposure therapy or aversion response therapy. Hey, when I get a certain height off the ground, my stomach feels queasy and my heart races and I feel flushed. Well, we're going to get you off the ground, maybe 6-8 feet, keep you there for a few minutes and let you climb down. And you just slowly build up your tolerance for how long you can stay and not be overwhelmed. Panic attacks break like waves. They go up, they crest, and then they fall out. Well, most people who are doing avoidance behavior, not facing their fears, when it crests, they think it's going to stay there. And so they bail out before it gets a break. And so they never know that this is a temporary state. And then the exposure therapy is just basically, hey, we're going to do it until we're somewhat comfortable doing it.
Pretty cool. That's awesome stuff. And I mean, that's kind of my experience with things too, is more that exposure and aversion, just building up the tolerance.
I've started talking about intentional adversity. That's not a quote I came up with, but the idea of, like in physical training, you guys are running half marathons. Well, the only way to run faster is to run faster. And it's uncomfortable. But when you do the intentional adversity, the idea behind that is I'm doing what most people will not do so I can continue to do what most people cannot do. Well, intentional adversity is not a bad thing. I'm going to make myself get in uncomfortable positions in my workout. My main workout right now for cardio is swimming, and I'm a terrible swimmer, but I'm increasing the amount of time that I'm spending, where I feel like I can't breathe and my arms are going to fall off, and doing the high intensity interval training, in a pool. And in jujitsu, I get on the bottom all the time. I pick on I get a bigger person, and I want to, everything I know has failed. I'm on the bottom and this monster's trying to rip my head off. Can I survive that situation? Well, the only way to get comfortable in a situation like that is to spend time in a situation like that.
That's good stuff. I was watching a YouTuber the other day that I'd subscribed to, and basically he started doing all of these adventures based on fear. He had a fear, and he was basically just knocking his fears, kind of like what you're saying, putting himself in uncomfortable situations to overcome those fears. But when we started talking about this idea of fear, I was curious, what is it about fear that motivates some people and then on the other side cripples other people? And I've just found it interesting how people use fear.
Actually, it's some of it is based on our interpretation of it. In the book Anxious by Joe Ledoux, he says we do not run because we are afraid, but we say that we were afraid because we ran. And so a running response has nothing to do with my courage. It takes place in the amygdala, the back part of your brain that bypasses the prefrontal cortex. It makes decisions for you. I think Malcolm Gladwell would call it rapid unconscious cognition. And so if you play sports at a high level, you field a ground ball without having to think, is it going to hop and hit me in the head? You don't have to think about, hey, put your glove all the way to the ground and square up with it. You just do it without thinking about it. Because if you thought about it, you might dodge it. You might get out of the way. It might hit you. And so if we're sitting in a room and I'm within 3 feet of Will and Will stands up and draws his fist back like he's going to punch me, I might move toward him. Now, that may not be the smartest thing in the world because Will's twice my size. But my brain says, without going through this part of the brain, it just says, hey, don't give him your back. Don't give him a free shot. Close the distance. Well, if I'm in the same room and Will is on the other side of a table and he stands up and draws his fist back, my brain may send me out the door because that's the quickest way to survival. And so a lot of people superimpose cowardice because your body's just doing that thing your body was designed to do. It does an evaluation of the situation and acts without cognitive or without conscious thought. Does that make sense?
Oh, completely.
And so, you're not running because you're afraid. You just say, oh, I was afraid because I ran. And that's not necessarily true. Your body takes over in that. I don't like to talk about the lizard part of your brain, but you have an amygdala that registers threat. If I'm walking through the woods and I see a bear, I want that part of my brain to yell bear and make me do something, either charge it or run from it. I don't want this part to go, is that a brown bear or is that a grizzly bear? Is that a black bear in his autonomous coloring phase? I don't want that part of my brain working. I want that part of my brain that moves. And so the fear, then, you get all this hormones dumped into your stomach. That's the quickest path to your bloodstream. Your heart rate increases, your lungs increase. And we don't like that uncomfortable feeling, but your body's working normal. Your body's doing what it's supposed to do to make you alert, motivated, and strong. And in order to run from you or fight you, I've got to be alert, motivated, and strong.
So let me follow up that for just a second. So there are situations, for instance, you work with the SWAT team, not the Skits with the Truth team. That's one thing. And there's probably some fears that some people have to get by in those things too. But you work with a group of people who run into situations that most people do not want to run into. So you've got, this question that Will's proposed too. There are times when, for a lot of people that would shut them down. I know some of that's training and doing these things. Maybe that is the answer, doing these things over and over again. But what makes the difference in those guys who run into burning buildings or those guys who run into hostage situations and your normal everyday?
In the police academy and in a basic SWAT school or in like our in-house 2-week school, we do that intentional adversity. We call it a stress inoculation. You expose people to a worst case scenario. And so you're having to function on a different level. We talk about, hey, when you leave the vehicle and you're approaching a house, if you take gunfire before you enter the structure, you fall back, set up a command post. Well, they're running from the danger. They're moving back to cover and they're setting up a perimeter. If you get in the house and you receive gunfire, then it's well-directed, aimed covering fire, and you assault through the threat. And so it's a contingency plan. And a SWAT guy who ducks behind cover when somebody shoots at him, not a coward. He's just smart.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes the difference is we don't practice it enough. And there's a lot of situations you can't train for. How are you going to react if, your child gets stung and has an anaphylactic shock?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can go through all the thing in the world of this is what I'm supposed to do. But when that fear mechanism takes over, some people have a flight response and they can't help themselves. Some people have a fight response, can't help themselves. Some people have a freeze response and they can't help themselves. Once you become aware, hey, in this situation, I react this way, you can begin to address it. But you really don't know till you've been there. There's no way to predict how you behave in a trauma or a tragedy or a fight or even a gunfight.
Yeah.
coming from somebody who has an aversion to orange, color orange, and has suffered one of my greatest fears over the last few weeks. Coming to mention coming out of the Tennessee game, the week later, Nick Saban was interviewed and said, our team played with anxiety, which even in his statement, you could tell he was like, I'm just not used to that. We do chants as we get ready to come out of the tunnel and we go out. And then Will Anderson was asked and he said, yeah, I think we had some guys who were playing with anxiety, which no shade to them. If I had 100,000 people there all dressed in that shade of orange, I would be out of my comfort. That's why I don't go to the games in Knoxville. But, even, and then later in the week, Nick Saban was interviewed and he said, I've lost more sleep this week than I have in years, just trying to figure out how to work through the things that are going in my players' minds. You could tell he's from that old school, you just soldier on and you suck it up. And then of course, I think Will's a millennial, but Ben and I are that, I think it's Gen X where it's like, whatever, who cares? Let's just go along and get along, whatever it takes. We're not going to get too offended by anything. So I guess my question a long way around is, as a parent or as a coach, and you being from a different generation yourself, what can we do to help these kids? In some ways, it seems like anxiety is a buzzword.
Yes,
Thrown around a lot.
It's almost a get out of jail free card. I don't have to do this because it makes me uncomfortable. And then we have parents who placate that. Our job is not to prepare the path for our children, is to prepare our children for the path. And if I could go back to the Alabama football, which I don't know a lot about college sports, but just from what you said, you go into Knoxville trying not to lose rather than trying to win. Well, then that's immediate avoidant behavior, and trying not to lose often makes you feel responsible for things that you can't control. I took, oddly enough, a gunfighting class from Tiger McGee. I was given a 1911 45 by a guy that I had pulled off of a cliff site. And I took a specific class on how to use a 45. And Mr. McGee, who taught at Thunder Ranch and has written the book of Two Guns, he said in a gunfight, there's only two things that you control: what you can do and how fast you can do it. And that pretty much is true in every situation. What can I do, and how fluidly or how quickly or how efficiently can I execute it? But if I go into any situation, whether it's a negotiation, whether it's a job interview, whether it's asking a girl for a date, whether it's preaching the gospel or doing a Bible study, and I start worrying about your response, then I'm responsible for something I don't control. When you think about the soul-stealing anxiety, because what if I make Ben mad? What if I make Will unhappy? Well, no. You read 2 Timothy or 1 Timothy, and Paul tells Timothy, the servant of God must not quarrel, must be gentle, able to teach, in humility correcting those who oppose him. And then perhaps God will grant them repentance. It's the whole idea is you've got a job to do, and you can only control how you present, and you're not responsible for that response. So I go into Knoxville, or I go into Tuscaloosa, or I go into a jiu-jitsu room, and I'm just worried about what I can do, not what they can do. And so, don't get swept, don't get swept, don't get swept. Well, as your belt rank goes higher, you don't care if they sweep you or not. You don't care if they get on top. You don't care if they attack your legs. It's, oh, so you did that. Well, here's what I'm going to do about it. But if you spend your life trying to control other people's actions so that you don't get in an uncomfortable position, you'll always be uncomfortable. You'll always be fearful, and you'll always feel like you're out of control.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, or is it too random?
Yeah, I think following the sport example, you see a Bryce Young in the Iron Bowl last year, 4th and whatever on their own 3, and he's smiling and he's having a good time. He's playing a sport. Same thing in Knoxville. He goes in there and he's having the time of his life, and I'm sitting in my living room thinking my heart's going to beat out of my chest. It's like, you don't have any control over any of this, and you're anxious. He's out there playing, and he's just rolling with it.
And you've left your satisfaction in life in the hands of college age young men.
Yes.
I remember a wise guy once saying, "Control the controllables," I believe.
Yes. That's in a
So
book called Grappling with Life, Controlling Your Inside Space. Available at Amazon.com.
Lonnie Jones. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, listen up. You won't hear Travis or me say this very often, so soak it in. Knoxville, Tennessee is the place to be this coming weekend. No, not for the surging volunteers. Thankfully, they won't be in town. It's because M2Y, the Ministering to Youth Conference, is being hosted in Knoxville this year on a different campus, the campus of Southeast Institute of Biblical Studies and Carnes Church of Christ. Youth ministers, elders, deacons, parents, and youth volunteers will all be present to hear lessons and collaborate on best practices for reaching our young people today with the message of Jesus and helping them walk faithfully now and into the future. You can register, see the schedule and speakers, and find more information about lodging and other things at m2yconference.com. That's m2y conference.com.
Part of the reason, obviously, that we are talking about fears is it's that time of year where people seem to enjoy being scared. They like to go to houses, haunted trail rides. Will has taken. In fact, I think some of those pictures from his T-shirt are from when they went on one of those, and people watch movies that scare them. So that's how long we want to talk about fear. So the fun question for you is, what movie or TV show character was the one that scared you the most? Did you ever have any that scared you, Lonnie? Were there any that visited you in your dreams?
Not really. I did want to add a caveat that in dealing with fear, it's not controlling whether you're afraid or not, but controlling your response to the fear. There are things that scare you and you're afraid. Now, what am I going to do with that? So, I guess probably the scaredest I've ever been, or the most uncomfortable I've ever been in a movie, I was actually a little older, and I was at Jackie's house. And I had gotten there too late to go with them to the ball game. And so I was just going to hang out at their house. And I'm way out in the, at the end of a dirt road in Arkansas in this 2-story house. And they had a big satellite dish. And I got to see The Nightmare on Elm Street. And I guess Freddy Krueger may be, the guy that, I got my knife out of my truck and put it on the couch while I was watching that movie. It's one of those things. I've always had a hang up with werewolves. I don't believe in werewolves. I've never seen a werewolf. Never thought I saw a werewolf. But when I'm on morphine, when I've had surgery, I always dream about werewolves. And it seems to be that they show up in my dreams a lot. I always have a revolver that has silver bullets, and I combat load. I'll shoot a werewolf, pop the cylinder open, drop that one shell out, put another shell in so I don't run out. It was pointed out to me by our good friend Daryl Pickle that when I dream about werewolves, I'm hunting them. They're not hunting me. But so I guess I don't like werewolves. And I was reading the Game of Thrones books. And the first time I ran across the White Walkers, I was sitting in a tree in a frost-covered forest and read about the White Walkers in the North Snowlands. And that put me on a high alert that day, just, kind of looking around for stuff. So I guess Freddy Krueger, the White Walkers, and the werewolves would be my thing.
All right, Ben. What's yours? What you got?
So I guess for me, it's not a movie character, and you'll remember. I think the most frightening thing for me was my brother had a poster in his bedroom that was of an old Iron Maiden album cover of a skeleton flying a warplane, and it's kind of
I
like
remember. I've
like
drawn
it's
that.
coming into the living room, or into the bedroom, and it was right at the end of the bed. So if you were or right on the side of the bed, well, it depends on which way the bed was turned at that time, but it was just right there on the wall, right over it. And I didn't like sleeping in that room when I was a kid because there was skeleton right there in front of me. And I never was a horror movie person, so I didn't watch a lot of them. I've watched more in the last several years, in my adulthood than I ever watched really when I was a kid.
So Supernatural with Dean and Sam Winchester, that describes my childhood. My brother and I were trying to figure out how to kill every evil thing that existed. And, I guess I thought I was going to grow up to be a hunter. I don't know. But when I first saw it, I called my brother and said, "Hey, I found this on TV."
That's awesome.
Will, what you got, man? What's scary?
The Hellfire and Brimstone gospel meetings in Zip City as an 8-year-old.
Yes.
Yes. That'd probably be the most terrifying thing, as a young child. Some of those preachers that rolled into good old Zip City that we would listen to. But I guess for me, like if you were going TV character, I probably wasn't supposed to watch Monday Night Raw, or WWF back then. But like the Boogeyman and some of those guys as like a 10-year-old, 10, 11-year-old at night with the door shut, trying to hide from mom and dad, like they kind of creep you out a little bit. And the Attitude Era was a little bit different, I guess, than wrestling now. So some of that stuff, Kane can be pretty terrifying to a 10-year-old boy. So probably some stuff from the Attitude Era and gospel meetings, if that all kind of jives together.
Yeah, I deal with Jaws in my nightmares. Lonnie talks about werewolves. I'm a Jaws, and then sometimes I'm running through a swamp, being chased by snakes and alligators. Probably the character is It, and I'm talking like the original guy, not the latest rendition of It, but the TV show version. My buddy and I from school, when we were like 5th graders, watched it by ourselves. And
so you're talking about the clown Pennywise?
Yeah, Pennywise. Yeah. And then Ben would remember very often that if I ever saw an alien on TV, and it could be a commercial, I mean, it could be like Unsolved Mysteries. If I hear that guy's voice today, I'm going to get heebie-jeebies. But any alien, any kind of alien, anything whatsoever, I had to go home from Ben's house one night because I was completely creeped out because I saw an alien or something on their TV. I mean,
that's pretty funny.
It was bad.
Lonnie, we appreciate you so much for coming on and being a part of this episode. For those of you that are listening, we sure hope that you will subscribe, that you will share, also that you will check out Lonnie's podcast, Keeping Up with Jones. Wonderful stuff every Tuesday. So if you could rate, subscribe to his as well, I know he would appreciate that, and we sure would as well.
And I meant to do this and I didn't look it up, but Google the lyrics to the song Fear, He Is a Liar. Mm-hmm. And it's a very inspirational song, one of my favorite songs, and I like those lyrics. I love you guys. Thank you guys for sharing your podcast platform and letting me be a guest frequently. I like hanging out with you guys. I love you. I appreciate what you do and the way you do it. I'm proud of all of you.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.